Hello everyone, it is Friday and that means it's time for my next episode of Toy Box Tutorials. Last week we looked at the Music Note Creator, which is a new creativity toy in Disney Infinity 3.0 that allows you to play a single musical note, and we built a small musical puzzle with it. Today we're going to look at the other new creativity toy that was added to 3.0 to support music, and that is the Metronome. And you can find that in the Creativity Toys drawer once you purchase it from the toy store. This toy allows you to string individual music notes together into a song, and together these two toys allow you to add your own custom music to your toy box. As I mentioned last time, I could not find any tutorials for these two toys anywhere online. All I did find was a Toy Box TV tips and tricks video that Disney produced that discussed these toys and showed a simple example, but they didn't really explain how these toys worked. And so I think this video and last week's video are the first full tutorials that anyone has produced for these two toys. And it's been a long time, so it's long overdue. So I want to spend some time today explaining the metronome in detail and building a good working example for you. And to do that, I have brought you back to my mini Disneyland toy box that I built a few weeks ago for episode 105. You may remember from that episode that we talked about the calendar configurator, which lets you set up events in your toy box that are based on the date and time in the real world. And the first event that I set up was a birthday event. And if you remember, I told you how I wished that the sound effects generator included a little birthday song, but it didn't. So today I'm going to fix that by using the metronome and the Music Note Creator to add my own happy birthday music to this toy box. Now, before we begin, I need to tell you that I know next to nothing about music. I never learned how to play an instrument or how to sing. I have no musical talent or training at all. And yet, as you will see, I could still add music to my toy box. If I can do it, you can do it. So don't think that only musicians can do this. That is not true. But it will take a little effort on your part. You're going to need to learn how to read sheet music and do a little simple math in order to set it up. But that isn't difficult. It just takes a little bit of time. And I will put, I will put a link in the video description to a page on my blog where you'll find an easy-to-follow tutorial that will teach you how to read sheet music. This tutorial was really helpful for me, and it only took me about maybe 15 minutes to go through it. I don't have time to teach you how to do that in this video, but I will show you step by step how the different notations on the sheet music correlate to the properties on the Music Note Creator and the metronome. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, so let's take a look at the metronome first. And I'll just bring one out here and drop it. And we're also going to need a button. So let me drop that down. Because I'll need that to show you the behaviors. Alright, on the metronome, if we open up the logic menu and go into the properties, there's a bunch of them here. The first property is time bar duration, and this corresponds to a time bar on the sheet music, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in a few minutes. You can take this all the way from 4 seconds up to 32 seconds. And you'll notice it increments in seconds. So you can't do a half second or something like that. And those of you who are familiar with music are probably already seeing a problem, but I'll get to that shortly. Now the next field is impulses per time bar. And you can think of this as the beats for each time bar. That's what this really corresponds to on the sheet music. It specifies the beats or the rhythm or the speed, the tempo of the music. And then you have number of time bars per cycle, And the range on this is 1 to 16, so you can't write a long symphony with this, but you can do a page or two of sheet music. And then we have number of full cycles. A cycle is basically how many times you play the music. So you can play this up to 100 times. The range on this slider is 1 to 100. Or you have a flag here that says cycle indefinitely. And if you turn that on, it'll ignore this, and it'll just loop through your music repeatedly until you tell it to stop. The next one is called sync time bars to background music. So if you have music for your Sky Dome playing, or something that you've set up through the boombox, you can sync the metronome to that music, and it will sync the notes that you're going to tie to the time bar through this metronome to that background music. All right, this is off by default. If you want to do that, you can turn it on, and it'll try to sync your music to the background music. I will leave this off. One thing I will note about this property is that if you're going to use music and you don't want to use the music from the Sky Dome, you want to use your own custom music, you're going to want to make sure you put down a boombox and set it to silence so that you turn off the Sky music. Otherwise, this will be playing over top of that. The last one is audible ticks on impulses. And what this will do if you turn it on is it'll go tick, tick, tick on every impulse. And some musicians find that helpful as they're learning to play a new piece. Most of the time you're probably going to want this off because that gets annoying pretty quickly. All right, let's look at the behaviors next. So we'll come over to our button, do a new logic connection when pressed, and we'll open up the menu of behaviors for this toy. So the first behavior on the metronome is start cycle. This will start the metronome broadcasting impulses, which are going to tie to the musical notes. So this effectively starts playing your music. The next one is pause. So you can tell your toy, your metronome toy, to pause at any time. And then you can tell it to resume. So if there's something going on in your toy box and you need to pause the music for any reason, you can do that. And you can resume it. And then we have a few cancel options. There's a cancel immediately, which will cause the metronome to immediately stop playing. You can also cancel after the current time bar, so you can let it finish the current bar that it's on. And you can cancel after the current cycle. So if you've got multiple cycles and you're looping through the music, you can have it cancel after the current cycle finishes. So you can allow the music to finish before it stops. So those are the three cancel options. And those are your behaviors for the toy. So that's pretty straightforward. And then back in the logic menu on the metronome, if you look at new logic connection, there are a bunch of trigger signals under here. So if you want to know when a toy has directed the metronome to start, it will broadcast the started signal that you can then hook other toys up to. Same thing when this is paused or when this is resumed, it'll broadcast those trigger signals. When a time bar is finished, it'll broadcast this signal. And so if you want to know when that happens because you're trying to sync other things up to the music, for example, fireworks or something, and you want to know when a time bar is finished, this will tell you that. When you want to know when it's done looping through your music, when a cycle is completed, it'll broadcast this signal. The very final time it has finished the music and it is completely done, it'll broadcast this signal. And so if you want to know when the music is totally done, you can hook this one up. So if you have multiple pieces of music, for example, that you want to loop through, you can have multiple metronomes running, and when one finishes, you can kick off the next one. So that's how you might use this signal. If you want to know when it's canceled, this one gets broadcast when the music stops. And then you have two fields here. This one is called time bar 1, and this is dynamic. So if, for example, we go into the properties and we say we want 2 time bars per cycle, what you'll notice is when you come into the new logic connection, now we have time bar 1 and time bar 2. If you select one of those, these are all the impulses that it will broadcast for that. And there's only 4 right now, because if you go into the properties, we have 4 impulses per time bar. So if you increase this to 6, for example, and you come back to the logic connections, go down to time bar 1, now you have 6 signals under here. So as you change the properties, it will add and remove time bars and add and remove the impulses. And then we have a final option here called all time bars, and if you select that, you can have something trigger on the first impulse from every time bar, or the second impulse from every time bar, or whatever. So if, for example, you wanted to hook up to a beat, you could connect this to the sound effect generator for a drum beat, for example. That's an option you might do, or however you want to do that. So that is how the metronome works, and it's fairly straightforward. How that relates to music is where the question comes in, of course. But now that we've seen what this toy offers, let's use it in a real example to add some music to this toy box. And as I said, I want to have my birthday event play the happy birthday song. So let me pick this up and put it down, just so I can get back to that part of the Creativity Toys drawer. We'll delete that one. And let's go over here, because behind these buildings I've laid out some Creativity Toys ahead of time. And we're going to drop our metronome right here. So I've got a couple of buttons that we're going to use to start and stop the music. So we'll hook this one up to start the cycle. And we'll hook this one up to cancel it. That will allow us to test what we're doing here. And we'll cancel immediately. So those will be our 2 buttons that do that. And ignore the other toys on the left for right now. So the first thing we need for whatever song we want to add is some sheet music. Sheet music tells us the notes to play and the speed of the song. For the toy box, I would recommend using sheet music for beginning or intermediate level students. The metronome has some limitations, which I'll talk about as we go along here, and it really can't handle anything more complex than that. Now, there are all kinds of places that you can go online to find free sheet music. Just do a simple Google search and you'll probably find what you want. This is the sheet music that I found for the traditional Happy Birthday song. It's a single page with only 4 rows, and it isn't very long, as you can see. The lines at the top of each row are the treble clef, and the lines at the bottom of each row are the bass clef. And notice we have notes on both clefs. This symbol tells us that the music is in the G major key, which means that every time we see the F note in this music, it is automatically sharped. So an F is actually an F sharp. So with that information, we can go through the sheet music and label every note. The letter is the note, and the number next to it is the octave. And again, the tutorial that I linked to on my blog will teach you how to determine that. Here are the notes that I have labeled for all 4 rows. So this is the first row. This is the second row. This is the third row. And this is the 4th row. All right. Now, there's some information at the start of the music that tells us the rhythm and the tempo. This is the tempo. Sometimes the sheet music will give you the exact tempo in beats per minute, but other times it will use a subjective term, like it does here. And the term that this music gives us is moderato. Is that pronounced right? I don't know. You people who are musicians can tell me if I blew that, but that's how I read it, is moderato, which roughly equates to about 110 beats per minute. And to keep the math symbol, I'm going to round this up to 120 beats per minute, because moderato is subjective, and so you can tweak this a little bit. So that's my justification for that. So 120 beats per minute, that's going to be the tempo of our music. These two numbers here give us the rhythm. The top number tells us how many beats per bar. The bottom number tells us that every quarter note gets 1 beat. So there are 3 quarter notes in every bar, because there's 3 beats per bar. If you look at each row, there are vertical bars that divide up each row into sections. These are called bars or measures. That's what each section is called. And those sections, those bars or measures, equate to the time bar on the metronome. The first bar doesn't have 3 beats, but that's okay because that's the intro. But after that, you see the next bar has 3 beats. There's 3 quarter notes. The next bar also has 3 beats. The half note takes up 2 beats, and the 2 eighth notes on the end take up 1 beat, so 3 beats, and so on. So how do we set up the metronome to match this? Well, for that, we need to do a bit of math. The first property in the metronome, if we come over here and look at that, once again, is the time bar duration. To calculate that, we can use this formula. We take 60 seconds, divide that by the beats per minute, and multiply that by the number of beats per bar. So if we plug in the numbers from our sheet music and do the math, we find that the length of each bar is 1.5 seconds. That is the time bar duration. And by the way, since there are 3 quarter notes in a bar, each quarter note is a half second. So we come into our properties and we go to set this to 1.5 seconds, and we run into a problem because I'm pressing the left key on my keypad here and it's not changing. I can go this way, but I cannot go that way. So 4 seconds is the minimum that we can set the time bar duration, and this is a problem because the minimum value that it will allow us to set is 4 seconds. Notice too, we can't specify half seconds. It increments in 1 second intervals. This is disappointing, but there is a workaround, and I'm sure musicians who are sticklers probably aren't going to like this. But in order to set up the metronome, I'm going to combine multiple bars together into one time bar. So since each bar is 1.5 seconds, if I combine 4 bars together, that gives me a time bar of 6 seconds. And so that's what I will set my time bar duration for. So 1 time bar on my metronome will actually correspond to 4 bars on my sheet music. Okay? Because 6 is something we can set for the duration here. Now the next property is the impulses per time bar. And you can think of an impulse, again, as a beat. The sheet music specifies 3 beats per bar, and since I combined 4 bars together into 1 time bar, that means that as far as the metronome is concerned, each time bar is 12 beats. So I will set that on here accordingly. The next property is time bars per cycle. How many time bars do we have? Well, if we go through the sheet music and count up the number of bars, we have a total of 9 bars, but remember, I've combined 4 bars to equal 1 time bar as far as the metronome is concerned, and that means I need 3 time bars. The first time bar will include the first 4 bars from the sheet music. The second time bar will include the next 4 bars from the sheet music, and the third time bar will include the 9th and final bar from the sheet music. So there we go. Now for the number of full cycles, I'm going to leave this set at 1 because I only want to play my music 1 time. And then we'll leave the rest of the properties set the way they are. And there we go. The metronome is now set up and ready to play. So hopefully that was easy for you to follow. Now for the individual music notes. And again, we use the music note creator from that, and you find that in the Instant Fun category. Now ideally, to save memory, you'd probably want to set up a single music note creator for each unique note in the sheet music. So rather than setting up multiple music note creators for each and every occurrence of the C note, for example, just set up a single music note creator for C and reuse that object. But since I have the memory, and I'm trying to explain how to do this, I went ahead and put down separate music note creators for each and every note in my sheet music, and I organized it by bar. So in the first bar, if you remember, we had 2 notes, 2 eighth notes. In the next bar, we had 3 quarter notes. In the next bar, we had a half note and 2 notes on the bass clef and 2 eighth notes. The next bar, we had 3 quarter notes. The next bar, we had another half note, 2 notes on the bass clef, and another 2 eighth notes. The next bar had 3 notes on the treble clef and a note on the bass clef. The next bar, we had 4 notes on the treble clef and notes on the treble clef and 1 note on the bass clef. And then in this bar, we had 3 quarter notes, and in the last bar, we had a half note and 2 notes on the bass clef. So I laid these out by bar. So again, we had 9 bars on our sheet music, so I've got 9 rows of notes here. And I'm just trying to make that easy for you to follow along. So we go into the properties for each note, and we set this based on what is in our sheet music. So the first note in my sheet music was a D. We set that, and it was in the 4th octave, which was fine. And it's an 8th note. So we come down here, and again, our bar is 1.5 seconds, which means each quarter note is a half second. So an 8th note is half of that, which is 250 milliseconds. But this only increments in hundreds, not 50s. So since I can't set it to 250, I'll set it to 200. That's the closest I can get. All right. So the second note that was in the first bar was also the same note. It was a D and it was an 8th note. So we'll set that accordingly. The first note in the second bar, I wish that camera wouldn't keep spinning that around. This was an E. And this was a quarter note, so I leave this set at 500. It was in the 4th octave, so I'll leave that set. But you go through then and set the note for every one of these, for every note in your sheet music. And I'll just show you the properties for these. So this was the next one. This was the next quarter note. The first note in the third bar was a half note. So for a half note, it was a F sharp, because every F is a sharp. It's in the 4th octave, and the duration is 1000, so it's a full second, because again, it's a half note. That's 2 quarter notes. And then these are the 2 notes that were next. These were on the bass clef. So we had C in the 3rd octave, quarter note. We had D in the 3rd octave, quarter note. And then we had 2 eighth notes that were the same. These were D, and I set these at 200. Those are in the 4th octave. And then the next one are 3 quarter notes. And I set the properties on those. This one, this was another half note. So you can see this takes a little bit of time to set all of this up. But you go through each and every note and set them up. These are the 2 that were on the bass clef. These were the 2 eighth notes at the end of the treble clef. In the next bar, we had the first note. Now this was high up on the staff, so this was actually in the 5th octave. And it's a quarter note. The note on the bass clef, which comes next, was B. Sorry, this is on the treble clef. This was a quarter note. This one's the one that was on the bass clef. This was D in the 3rd octave, and it was a half note, so I set that to 1,000. And so on. So again, you just go through and set every note, and that does take time. This isn't a difficult process, but it does take time, because you have to set up each and every note. Okay, so with that done, we have the metronome set up, we have all of the individual music note creators that are set up. The next thing to do is to hook them all up. And so we're going to come over to the metronome, and I'm going to show you how to do this. So for the first bar, we only have those 2 eighth notes. And what that means is, since we don't have 3 beats per bar, we basically have just 1 beat. I'm going to use the 3rd beat to start those off. So the first 2 notes are going to be doing nothing, or the first 2 impulses. So impulse 1 won't do anything, impulse 2 won't do anything. We'll start on impulse 3. We'll come over to our first 8th note and play the default note. Okay? Now, what do we do with the next 8th note? Because if you come over here and you do a new logic connection on time bar 1, you can't use impulse 3 because you'll end up playing the same 8th note, both of those 8th notes at the same time. You can't use impulse 4 because that's the next beat. That's the first beat in the next bar. I need something in between these two, and I don't have that. Ideally, to fix that, what I would think to do would be to go into the properties and instead of doing 12 impulses per time bar, since I have some 8th notes, I would be tempted to use 24 impulses per time bar. Problem is, I can only go up to 16. So that's not going to work. Because if I did that, then what I would be thinking is that on the logic connections then, the impulses would correspond to 8th notes. And so you do the first beat, the first note on impulse 1, you'd do the next one, you'd skip to impulse 3, the next one to impulse 5. And if you needed to do an 8th note, you'd have an impulse in between. But again, I can't do that. So what do we do to play 8th notes? Well, for that, we use a time delayer. And that's why I dropped this out here. So what we can do is we can set the properties on this. 8th notes in this sheet music are 250 milliseconds, or 0.25 seconds. And so this will allow us to kick off the 8th note. So on the metronome, sorry, we come down to time bar 1. Again, we skip the first 2 impulses because we only have 2 8th notes in that first bar. This is the intro. So the first 8th note I kicked off on impulse 3. We need to start the time delayer for the next 8th note on the same impulse. So we start that delay, and 250 milliseconds later, a quarter of a second later, we'll have this go off on delay completed. We'll play the next 8th note. Okay? So there we go. The first bar is done. And if we come out here and we push the button to play, there's our 2 8th notes. And I'll hit stop there just so it doesn't keep going through the rest of the time bars, which aren't hooked up. All right, so now we'll do the next bar. So a new logic connection. The second bar is also in my time bar 1, because again I combined 4 bars into one time bar. And the next bar starts on impulse 4. So we connect that up to the first note over here, and we play that default note. Did I hook that up to this one? Yeah, I hooked that up to the wrong one. Sorry about that. I meant the row ahead of it. I laid this out to make it easier for you guys to follow and myself to follow, and I messed it up. Time bar 1, impulse 4, we come up here, and these are all quarter notes, so that means we just do straightforward connections here. So time bar 1, the next impulse, which is impulse 5, goes to the next note, and the next impulse in time bar 1, which is impulse 6, goes to the next note. And there we go. So that's pretty straightforward. Now the third one starts on impulse 7. That's when the third bar starts. So on impulse 7 we come over and we play our half note, and that's going to go for 2 beats. On the second beat though, we have 2 notes that are going to go off on the bass clef, and the notation that's on there shows these 2 are played almost back to back super quick. Since I can't really do that because I don't have the granularity here, I'm just going to kick both of these notes off with the same impulse and play them at the same time. So on time bar 1, on impulse 8, we'll play this note. And on impulse 8, we'll play the other note on the bass clef. Okay. And then on impulse 9, on the ninth beat, we have the 2 eighth notes. So once again, impulse 9, we connect up to that. And we need to use a time delayer for the other 8th note. And by the way, since this only goes down to a quarter second, you can't do 16th notes because I can't set that to 0.125. So if you have sheet music with 16th notes, that's not going to work, unfortunately. So that's another limitation here, and that's unfortunate. So also on impulse 9, we kick off the time delayer. Quarter second later, that'll play the other 8th note. All right, so there's the third time bar. The fourth time bar just has 3 quarter notes. So time bar 1, we map impulse 10 to that one, 11 to the next one. And again, you can see this just takes a little bit of time to hook all of this up. And I thought about fast forwarding, but I don't want to do that because I don't want to skip this. I know this is all new for many of you. Some of you don't even know music like me, so I don't want to skip anything and confuse you. So this will be a little bit longer video today, and I apologize for that. There's the first 4 bars. Let's just hear what we got so far. That's sounding pretty good so far, don't you think? All right, let's hook the rest of it up. All right, so that's everything for time bar 1 on the metronome. The first 4 bars are hooked up. So now we come down to time bar 2. Impulse 1. That comes to the 5th row, the 5th bar. And we play our half note here. And that goes for 2 beats. But on the next beat, we have these 2 notes again that are down on the bass clef, and these are right on top of each other. So we'll just play these both off of beat number 2, impulse number 2. So time bar 2, impulse 2. Play the default note. Same thing with the next one. Time bar 2, impulse 2. So hopefully as we're going along here, you're kind of seeing what it takes to hook up music. It is tedious, does take a little time, but hopefully you're seeing that this has a lot of possibilities here. All right, third impulse, we have again 2 eighth notes. So we'll kick off the first one. We'll use a time delayer to kick off the second one. So once again, we set the property here to 1/4 second. New logic connection, time bar 2, impulse 3, kick off our time delayer, new logic connection when the delay is completed, play our other 8th note. So there is the 5th bar. For the 6th bar, that's in time bar 2 and starts on impulse 4. That's this row. And for this one, let's see, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, we got the first note. New logic connection. Time bar 2. Impulse 5. You got to pay attention to where you are here. And we also have a note in the bass clef we play at the same time, according to our sheet music. So on time bar 2, impulse 5, and then impulse 6 will be the other 1/4 note. As I said, it's real easy to get messed up and lose your place. All right, so there is the 6th bar. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, next bar. That starts on time bar 2, impulse 7. And we have actually 2 notes here. We have the note, the F sharp, that's in the treble clef, and we also have a half note down in the bass clef. So we need to play this one also on impulse 7. Okay. Now, let me pull up the sheet music here for a second. The next note, you'll notice there's a little symbol over top of it, kind of like a little bird's eye or something. And that's called a fermata, I think it is. And it's basically an indicator that the player should take a short pause here. The pause can be subjective though, so it's up to the discretion of the player. And in this case, since the metronome is so limited, I'm going to ignore this pause. And I'm just going to play this on the next impulse. So on impulse 8, we'll just go ahead and play that note. And then on impulse 9, we have 2 more eighth notes. So we kick off the first one. New logic connection. Impulse 9. Kick off the time delayer. And on the time delayer properties, again, set that to 1/4 second. And by the way, this might change. It may not be 1/4 second for the sheet music that you want to use. So again, pay close attention to the tempo and the rhythm that are on your sheet music, because that may dictate that your notes are a little bit longer or shorter than mine. All right, so there is that bar. So we've done 7 bars now. All right, bar number 8 just has 3/4 notes. And bar number 8 corresponds to time bar 2, impulse 10. So we'll hook that one up. Impulse 11 is the next note. And impulse 12 is the final note. All right, and then time bar number 3 is just the final bar here. And we have a half note that starts it off. So on time bar 3, impulse 1, we kick off the half note. So that's the first beat. On the second beat, though, we have 2 notes. So even though this goes for 2 beats, we got 2 notes on the bass clef that are going to go off at the same time. So on the metronome, new logic connection on time bar 3, impulse 2, play that note. On the same impulse, we'll play the other note. And the rest of time bar 3 isn't hooked up to anything because we're done with the music. There is no more music. All right, let's see how we did. And actually, you could even have those last couple notes, instead of kicking off on impulse 2, it might be better to have those go off on impulse 3. But there you are. Happy birthday. In my toy box, I have added my own custom music from some sheet music, which is pretty cool. Now, if we want to tie that into our event that we set up back in episode 105, originally I had my calendar configurator set up to invoke the sound effect generator here. And I had it going to the musical category and doing Royal Fanfare. So let's go ahead and delete that link. And let's have it go to our happy birthday music instead. So on the calendar configurator, a new logic connection. When the queried time is in the specified range, and it's time for our event, we just come over to the metronome and start the cycle. And to test that out, let's go to our calendar configurator properties, and let's set this to today's date, which, as I'm recording this, is October 9th. I'm working ahead a little bit This won't air for you guys until next Friday, but I'm like 14 or 15 days ahead here. Okay, so there we are. So now when we push this button, it should be in the specified range for that. It should be the happy birthday. It starts playing. And again, I would normally hook that up to a level starter, but I'm using a button here for the example. So we come into the toy box. A level starter would go off, but since I'm not using that, I'll push the button. That is so cool. So now, when it's my birthday and I come in here and it detects that it's my birthday, it'll say congratulations, it'll launch off the fireworks, and it will play happy birthday. How cool is that? Well, I think that's everything that I needed to cover for the Metronome and the Music Note Creator. And I'm sorry my video was rather long today, but I wanted to give you a complete working example that shows how to take a page of sheet music and play it in the toy box. And between the sheet music tutorials that I've linked on my blog that teach you how to read sheet music and this video, you should have everything you need in order to add your own custom music to your toy box. Thank you for watching. Before you go, please leave a comment to let me know what you think of this tutorial and whether you plan to try adding some custom music to your Disney Infinity 3.0 toy box. And if you enjoyed this video, or at least found it helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. That's all for me today. Have a great weekend.